Cross Creek Ranch is a 3,200-acre master plan community on the west side of the Houston metropolitan area. Houston is growing fast, got a lot of jobs, building a lot of homes. Greenfield development is really the largest segment of growth of communities in Houston. One of the downsides of the spread of Houston out onto agricultural land is its impacts on water quality. And one of the basic fundamental goals of Cross Creek Ranch was to rethink how the land impacts the overall landscape and how the landscape impacts stormwater runoff.
The design is not intended to be an exact replication of an ecosystem or ecosystems. What we're trying to do is we're trying to use landscape for a functional purpose, and we want to bring back some of the elements that were once lost. So whether it be character, culture of the region, or even the wildlife, we want a large contiguous system that serves multiple purposes and has an interaction amongst the natural processes that you normally see. The developer has actually said they're willing to do something a little bit different with their wastewater treatment. And so working with them during the design phase, we proposed basically a 50-acre wetland treatment basin, with the idea being that there's 3 different processes within treating gray water. There's the first 2 processes essentially take out the harmful chemicals and the solids, and then the third process is what's called a polishing process. And so it takes out the sediments and the nutrients before it's released back into a stream, a lake, or whatever it may be.
In the background, you can see the water quality basin. You can actually see the sewage treatment plant. That's where the water actually travels from the plant. It travels all the way to the north and then back to the south before it goes into the overflow. And this is the source into the lake system, and the lake system is what we irrigate out of. Last year in the drought, this water quality basin was basically dry. They actually had some water rationing out here. And one thing that was great is these native grasses, they develop deep root systems and they're drought tolerant. And last year we had the worst drought on record. And as you can see, here it is this spring, and things have responded just fantastically.
All along, we're very interested in water quality, and we're very interested in how you blend water quality features into a master plan community in a way that builds the value of the real estate, builds the value of the community.
What we tried to do at Cross Creek Ranch was, wherever possible along the lake edge, put wetland shelves that allow habitat for wildlife, and at the same time follow the same pattern as the wetland treatment basin, so that when water comes from the treatment basin down through the detention basins, then they still are interfacing again with another wetland. And so behind me, you can see some of the grasses, the wetland plants and grasses that we've installed along the edge. And what we've always said is there's wetland plants and then there's wetland planting. And the distinction seems minor, but it's actually very important in that oftentimes you'll see a couple of plants along the water's edge. But what you really want is you want a long, contiguous system of plants so that the habitat itself is fairly robust. It's not one plant to hide behind, it's multiple species. One of my most memorable experiences at Cross Creek was shortly after we had come through in the phase 1 planting, and we had installed some of the forest, we had installed some of the native grasses, and in the distance I could see what looked like a small wetland planting bench. And as you start to walk down there, you don't think too much of it. You think you're going to come upon, a few different plants. They might be flowering, they might not. And at about 10 feet away from the wetlands, all of a sudden all these birds came flying out of nowhere. And I walked along the lakeshore, and the pattern consistently happened over and over at each wetland. And so for a user of the community who's along the trails, it's a pretty unique thing to, wherever you go, have this experience of being embedded within something bigger, within wildlife and sort of your recreation corridor as well. At the same time, Thinking about as habitats are diminishing and places for wildlife to go become more and more fragmented, the idea of creating a place that's a system rather than a plant is essential to what we're trying to do at Cross Creek.
The lakes add value to the real estate, a lot of lakefront property, public trails all around the lakefronts, great recreational activities, and all those trails, of course, link up to Llewellyn Creek. It runs right up the spine of the project. The stream was laid out according to fluviogeomorphologic principles appropriate to the soils and the slope and the vegetation, and the project has very successfully gone through a number of major storm events, rainfall events, even in its very initial period before the trees were planted, and survived, kind of came through with shining colors. So everybody is very excited by it, very pleased with the work.
Originally, the water that was coming off Llewellyn Creek came from a highly incised ditch that was channelized. Very, very steep slopes with sand and clay that was eroding and sending fairly poor water down into the Brazos River. And the idea with the restoration of Llewellyn Creek was we need to return it to equilibrium. We need it to be a stream that you naturally find in this region. And what we did is we worked with biohabitats, we worked with Brown and Gay engineers, and we figured out the velocities, the runoff that would be coming within the stream, and we shaped a channel that was geomorphically correct. And so it meanders in this bottom floodplain. The stream has cut bank areas, steep on one side, point bars on the other, has riffle pool sequences, all for the sake of creating a system of water that's stable.
So we went and we planted dead trees, full-size dead trees, up and down this corridor, maybe a dozen or a couple dozen of them. And what these are, they're an important part of jump-starting the ecosystem. So people thought we were absolutely bananas out there with Caterpillar tractors, just plucking these huge trunks down into the ground, because those are raptor habitat. They provide places for birds, and particularly raptors.
So part of the biohabitats plan and design is to install live stakes into the banks of the pilot channel or the main creek. And what that is it's pieces of black willow, and they are usually about 2 feet long. Those get installed directly into the banks of the creek. They are supposed to just root and support the banks of the creek and stabilize those outside bends of the creek that are subject to scour and the most velocity of the water.
The other important part about having the live stakes in the trees in this portion of the stream is the cut bank area is actually where you get your deepest pools of water, and it's kind of a protected area for fish and wildlife.
We get a lot of rain, so stormwater management from a flood control standpoint, you need create a lot of volume to place that water somewhere. So the Llewellyn Corridor was designed both as a stream conveyance mechanism, but also as part of the floodwater detention system. Some features that the creek has is where the urban runoff that's coming off the landscapes, as I just mentioned, come into the creek corridor. They usually come into plunge pools. There are these basins that are sort of receiving the water coming out of the drainage system. Those are deeper water environments. It's a place for sediments to settle out. It's a place to catch floatables that get through the system, styrofoam cups and cigarette butts and things like that.
We had a beaver that moved into the stream, and that changes a lot of the natural system dynamics that we were working with. However, it says that there's something here that's working from a wildlife perspective as well.
It's an ecosystem that we've provided out here, and it's all works together. Our clients that work directly with us out on this project, Rob Bamford and Colin Pierce, they've both become very educated in this system now, and it's been wonderful to see them embrace this community and actually stand behind it.
Cross Creek Ranch, wonderful place. It's nature. It just makes you smile as you drive into the place. It's a wonderful concept.
Why go anywhere where there's sunshine and water and beautiful plants and trails and hiking and whatever you want to do when you can stay home and have that.
We're hoping that this is an example of a sustainable best practice for stormwater. It's a move in a direction away from mowed Bermuda grass, mowed St. Augustine, to a much richer, more complex ecosystem in the suburban landscape.
People in the region are looking at this as an example of what they would like to do, a way that water is managed in a responsible way, a way that they can create communities and open spaces that are meaningful, something that, you know, as designers, it's a process. And so we really feel like this is the next step in the process.